Thank you for coming. Thank you, Michael, and thank you to the Boulder Bookstore. It is truly an honor to be in one of the most extraordinary bookstores, I think, in the world. And I had some time today, this afternoon, to stop by and check it out. And I walked in, and the first thing I saw in the window was a display of my book, which was really quite heartening. Then I walked up the stairs and saw my book next to Michael Pollan's book. At that point, I got out my camera. That had to go on Facebook. So I feel like I'm an extraordinary company, and surrounded by books that I know people put a lot of effort and time into writing. And what's interesting is why did they do that? Why is it that somebody takes the time to write something down? And I can tell you a little bit about why that happened for me. But I want to go back to what Michael was saying, which is that Woody Tash, who started the Slow Money movement, came to the town that I live in North Carolina, Pittsboro, North Carolina, which is about a half an hour south of Chapel Hill, near Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, that area, but rural and lots of small farms. And he spoke about slow money. And the timing was right. It just made sense to me. I had already gotten very interested in local food, and I was already I'm a native of the small farm movement. I was raised in a very small town in rural New England. My dad was the large animal vet. So as a little girl, I would ride with him in the station wagon. We would go from farm to farm. And, I would play with the barn cats, and I would bring top milk home to my mother, top cream home to my mother. And in my lifetime, I watched those farms disappear, one after another after another. And I felt very saddened by the loss of small farms. So this, I think, for me, actually is kind of my opportunity, my chance to try to support small farming and bring it back. Now, in rural North Carolina, where I live, small farming was not quite the same. It was really plantation farming. But there was a lot of subsistence farming, and there is now a growth of small farms. So that's exciting, and I feel honored to be a part of that. The way I've been able to be a part of that is Woody's idea was if we would all just take some of our investment dollars and actually loan them directly to small farmers and food businesses, what a difference that would make. And these are in particular loans that no bank is going to do. So just recently in our town, Donna Bianco, fellow Italian, she decided she was going to start a little pizza place, and she was going to add a school, and she was going to teach kids and make pizza. And that kind of went so for a couple of years. And then the Pizza Hut, this is happening all over the United States, the Pizza Hut went up for sale. They're selling all their buildings, and they're going to some sort of smaller concept. And she and her husband got a hold of the idea they were going to get that Pizza Hut. He's a very wonderful builder. They were going to gut it, and they were going to actually build their own Italian restaurant. Donna is completely consumed with local food. She buys everything local she possibly can. If you've got basil, you've got extra basil, she'll take it. She'll put it into pesto, and she'll use it all winter long. If you've got tomatoes, she'll take them. She's just delightful in that way. So she came to me to see if she could get some help with funding. They were able to secure a fairly large amount of money to help with the mortgage, but the upfitting, the equipment, all that kind of thing, she just didn't have it. But she has a loyal customer base. People have been coming out to eat her food for a couple of years. She put the word out to them that she needed help, and they should just call Carol Hewitt. They even put this in the newspaper, which is a little risky in terms of the way we're supposed to approach people about investing. But nonetheless, people signed up. One for $5,000, and another couple for $2,000, and Mary wanted to do two, and Jerry wanted to do three more, and somebody else, and then people that couldn't do that much started buying $1,000 gift certificates. I think she sold five $1,000 gift certificates, and it was just so exciting to see the community jump up and come forward to help her. She's now open. She's had her grand opening, and it was delightful. She and I and her husband, I guess, were the only ones that knew at the grand opening that person standing over there was in, and that person was in, and that person was in, and that's what funded this wonderful restaurant. Very much a community project. And some lenders are open about their lending, and some are anonymous. It really doesn't matter. In the large scheme of things, it only matters that they helped. So those are small, short-term loans that they will get paid back in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I could tell you more about Slow Money North Carolina, but I do want to dip into the book a little bit. And I want to tell you how to read the book. So first of all, you can poke through here and you can discover that I've dedicated it to my daughters. And then you can go a little further and there's some acknowledgments. And then you're going to discover a wonderful foreword written by Woody Tash. At that point, it gets however it gets. So you start at the back. You start at the back at that point because there's these wonderful things called gray boxes. And when I was writing it, I kept coming up with little snippets that didn't really go anywhere. So I would put this in a gray box, off to the editor. And so you can kind of spin through and just catch some of the gray boxes. This is when you don't have very much time. And one of the first ones you're going to come to is kind of the reason that this whole book came to be. If I can find it, you can. There you go. And this is in a little gray box. In 2012, Hostess, maker of Twinkies, filed Chapter 11. And Kraft is laying off workers. Maybe it's just the economy, or maybe it's that the demand for highly processed food is decreasing as the number of farmers markets and CSA memberships are on the rise. It was Kraft that got me into this in the first place. Lyle and I were talking one day about how cool it would be if at a high-level sales meeting of an international sales conglomerate like Kraft, they discovered a problem. Wouldn't it be great, Lyle said, if the sales director pointed to a donut hole on the map of North Carolina and barked, "What's this? They aren't buying any of our processed cheese, or lunch meat, or frozen pizza, or much of anything. What the hell is going on down there?" I imagined this director glaring accusingly at the poor sales rep assigned to that underperforming area, Our Foodshed. This, we envisioned, would be their dilemma. Once we helped double the number of sustainable farms in Chatham County while supporting the ones we already have, these local farmers would be filling the grocery stores with local meats and produce and helping our local restaurants feed us with the same. Bad for Kraft, but excellent for the health of Chathamites, our local economy, our precious restored farmlands, and our topsoil. So that kind of is what got me into this in the first place. We challenged each other, what if we had 35 farms at the time, 35 more farms. And it was a while later that Woody came to town, so he walked right in to a welcome audience. We were already trying to figure out a way to do this. So if you keep spinning, there's even pictures. People say to me, why do people make these loans? So there's a chapter on that. It's called Why Lend? And I actually surveyed the lenders. I sent them all out some questions. I said, why did you make this loan? And I said to them, I asked them about their background, because everybody thinks, they must have a lot of money. And that's what it is. So I asked them, what's your background? What were you raised? Were you raised working class, middle class, owning class? What's your class background? What are your stories? And I discovered that of the 60 lenders that I had, probably at the time I probably had 45. I'm up to about 39 projects now. I was at 20 when this book was written. Almost none of them were from wealth at all. They were from very middle class, a minister's son, just very, very sort of ordinary folk. Not that being rich isn't ordinary, but it wasn't as if they had vast amounts to spare. So I'm just going to read you a little bit about being a lender. Being public about making a slow money loan is completely at the discretion of the lender. Most of us were taught that it's rude to talk about money, how much you make or how much you have, so we keep that information confidential. But a culture of obscuring the truth about the flow of money in our society has gotten us into the financial mess we're in. Being transparent about the flow of slow money is one way to change that. I talk about my slow money loan all the time, Christy Schei told me. She was one of the 5 lenders that helped TS Designs, which is a t-shirt company, pay for the first crop of organic cotton ever grown in North Carolina, which has since been made into t-shirts. I'm so proud to be able to support a locally owned business in such a meaningful way. I'm really glad to be able to fill a niche that would otherwise go unfilled. This is another lender, and this fellow happens to be about 26 years old. Until yesterday, I hadn't talked to anybody about it, he told me. But I decided to tell a few friends to see how they'd respond. It actually felt good to talk about it. and encouraged a discussion about money that was healthy for all of us. Now they're interested in and curious to learn more. And this actually from another lender who's about 30. Seth was wide open. I have no problem with people knowing about small money loans that I make. I think that if more people knew and understood the power of money moving in a community, there'd be more of these loans. And this last comment from Ginger made me laugh out loud. Most people think it's a good idea. I had to ask them, what do people say, when you tell them about the loan? A few shake their heads. But in general, we don't tell people that shake their heads. So I will share with you just one more piece, which is Angelina's story. I mentioned Angelina. And there's Angelina, if you can see her. She's just as lovely as she can be. She's a Greek woman. And she came to town, and I met her, and I figured she had run lots of restaurants. I didn't know any better. But when she and her husband came to town, they turned out that they had never been in the restaurant business. Angelina and her husband John moved from New Mexico to North Carolina in 2005. They'd been working for large commercial construction contractors, John as a surveyor and project manager, and Angelina as a contract administrator. Their intention was to buy some land, get jobs in their fields, and settle into a fun life in North Carolina. But then life took a different turn. When Angelina heard that nearby Chatham County residents were being invited to take part in a walkability study for downtown Pittsburgh, she was intrigued. She was interested in urban planning as a possible career path, and this sounded like a way to make some town planning connections in Chatham. As it turned out, there were so many walkers that we were split into teams to cover various sections of the town. So one pleasant Saturday morning, I found myself strolling around Pittsburgh with this delightful, engaging Greek woman who I'd only just met. Leslie Landis, the mayor's wife, was also there. We looked around, scribbled on our evaluation forms the innumerable good ideas we had for improving our small town. We had a marvelous time, and Angelina and I have been friends ever since. It was typical Angelina. Because she didn't know anyone yet, she brought along some of her homemade spinach pies that day, spanakopita. She and I share a similar cultural style. Going somewhere, meeting new people, bring food. And of course they were yummy, the real deal, not the frozen packaged kind, and I asked her if she ever made them to sell. She was open to that idea, and I ordered some for an upcoming event that I was having at my house. Leslie wanted some as well, and so Angelina found herself with her first catering orders. This led to several more spinach pie gigs as folks around town got a taste of her talents, and thus the humble beginning, as she calls it, of Angelina's Kitchen. So we basically talked her into, several of us, into starting a restaurant, which she eventually did. I asked John to leave his job to help design and build out the kitchen, and the poor guy's never gotten a chance to go back. They started out with a takeout counter, and when the space opened up next door, John cut a hole in the wall, an arch to be accurate, and a much-needed seating area was added. So I knew that the upfit on this must have cost them a lot, and I didn't know that they had it. So one day I went into Angelina, and I said, one day I went in after lunch, I sat down with a question. Do you need money for this expansion? And I knew that they probably hadn't gotten bank money for this. They just moved to town, and it turned out it was on their credit card. They were paying 18% interest, and I knew we could do better than that. We settled on just a few percent, and I made my own first slow money loan. It was a great place to start. As I say, the reading of this book is kind of open it anywhere, and you'll get a story. You can go front to back if you feel so inclined. It's rarely the way that I read, but you're welcome to do that. But it really has been, it was very fun to go back and connect with people and say, I'm writing about you. And, sometimes I would send it to them and say, read this, did I get this right? Because I wanted to be accurate about their stories. But I did try to toss in the sections on why lend, and there's a section on the seesaw. People often say, well, where do you get the investors, the lenders? And then where do you get the people like Angelina? And I think you just talk about this project all the time. You talk about this all the time, and they begin to sort of surface. And then what I do is I introduce them to one another, and if they like each other and they want to build a personal relationship, then they can make a loan to each other. So I don't actually ever handle or touch the money. I'm just a facilitator. I sometimes refer to myself as the slow money escort service of North Carolina. So I want to tell you one more story, personal story, and then I'm going to read you just the introduction, which is 2 pages. And then I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions as well. But I realize when I think back to what got me started in writing at all, and I don't think of myself particularly as a writer, but when my dad was dying in 1995, he had cancer for a very short time, thankfully. His lungs filled up with fluid, and he had them drained. And the second time that happened, he said, "I'm not doing that again." And so we were sort of 5 children sitting, standing around singing. We kind of sang him out for the last 3 or 4 days of his life. And at one point, his last words were, "I have so much to say." And he was a very sweet, loving man, veterinarian, good father, good grandfather. And so I touched him. I said, "Dad, it's okay. I know what you want to say. You want to tell us again how much you love us. You want to tell us some more how proud you are of us." And he just went, so cute. But that stuck with me, and I actually wrote a little essay blog entry. It was sort of the early days of blogging. And I sort of threw it onto a website, which if you ever want to go find it, it's actually it's carolpeppehewitt.com. And it's just musings, it's mostly family stuff like that. But I wrote that, and it was, gosh, we all have so much to say. We should say it. Quick, say it, because there'll become a time when we don't get a chance again. So I think that was a big motivation in me getting these stories, getting these people's stories down. If they weren't going to get a chance to write them, then I guess I would. So I'm going to read you the introduction, which is very short, and then we'll chat. As I write, the slow money movement swirls around me. The project that I helped start here in Pittsburgh is now one of many. Slow money groups have started up in nearly 20 places in the United States and one in France as well, but it is this one in North Carolina that I know most intimately. Over the last 2 years, I've sought out lenders and borrowers who want to take part in this alternative financing venture. Each of the slow money loans has its own personal story, because money went from one caring, real, live person to a deserving other, not just on paper, not just on the books, but between 2 or 3 people over a cup of coffee or a plate of heart-shaped gluten-free cookies. And we did fund a gluten-free baker. There's magic in that moment of empowerment as a check passes from one like-minded person to another. It's a compelling display of the combination of ingenuity and generosity. It's a moment of hopefulness, something we could all use more of in our lives, and I find it thrilling. So in this book, I tell the stories behind some of the magic moments that have been facilitated by Slow Money North Carolina. In some cases, the lenders' names have been changed to give them anonymity, but the borrowers are all as they appear. They each have a spot on our website, slowmoneync.org, and we champion them every chance we get. Hopefully, you will be inspired to participate in this movement in some way as well. There are many entry points, from paying attention to how many miles your food travels before it gets to your plate, to cracking open your portfolio and finding ways to use a portion of it to significantly impact your local food economy. Whatever you decide, I hope you will enjoy meeting the fabulous people whose slow money stories are told in this book. I certainly have. And I must read you one last quote, and this is not my writing. This is John Fullerton, who's the founder of Capital Institute and former managing director of J.P. Morgan, and he very generously wrote me a very nice, whatever you call it, anyway, quote. It says, when the poetic, and there's one line in here I want you to hear, when the poetic fuses with the practical, the beauty of human potential reveals itself. As the unsustainability of our global economy steadily comes into ever greater focus, Carol's heartwarming slow money stories and her determination to make them possible offers a beacon for practical action centered around the idea, and this is the most important line in the whole book, and I did not write it, that the purpose of finance is to serve life and not the other way around. So, go, John. So I think I'm going to stop, and we can talk. Thank you. So Eric Henry of TS Designs, they were a T-shirt company, and for many reasons, their business was, going terribly. All the T-shirts are now made in foreign countries, and they're sustainability guys. You go into their plant, and there's solar tubes here, and there's a farm out back, and they've got a biodiesel plant there. It kind of goes on and on. And he convinced a local cotton farmer to grow a little batch of organic cotton, and he promised him he'd buy it. And I was saying to somebody earlier, it's kind of like saying to Exxon, could you make me a special gallon of fuel? So, this huge cotton farm. But he did. And so in order for him to do that, when the cotton was harvested, we had to buy it. And the T-shirts wouldn't be ready for sale for about 6 months. So I put together a group of 5 people at $6,000 each, $30,000, and we bought that cotton. And that actually had the collateral that for the next year, we either owned cotton, or we owned yarn, or we owned cloth, or we owned T-shirts, But that year is up, and now we've actually just funded it again for $25,000. But the farmer is working through some challenges with this, but the cotton's grown really well. He's really thrilled about the way the cotton grows, and he's delighted not to have to buy from Monsanto. Just delighted that he can grow these seeds. The seeds cost much, much, much less, and he can keep them and use them another year. So I think part of his motivation is to kind of, stick it to Monsanto. Yeah. So order your T-shirts for any projects you're involved in from TS Designs Company in Burlington, North Carolina. It's the only locally made, grown organic cotton T-shirt in the United States. Yeah. So. Any other questions? Yes?
Just in listening to you, the definition as you put it out of slow money
Yes.
does not include foundation grant funding? Is it individual investor and individual entrepreneur?
The way that I have been operating this in North Carolina has been individuals loaning to individuals. That's the only slow money loans that have been happening in order to support the tiny little nonprofit that I run. And I jokingly say, if my laptop is open, we're open, and if it's closed, we're closed. So we keep we run a very slim, tiny little nonprofit. But I did actually get a little bit of funding out of local foundation that offered me $5,000 for the Slow Money NC nonprofit if we would match it. So we've gotten a little bit of money that way. But these are not foundations making the loans, private individuals. They can do that. That's just not what I've been doing. So one of the things that's been kind of fun, there have been a number of us around the country that are trying to figure this out, and we're all trying something different. And we're all going to get together for the next couple of days and spend 2 days together in retreat, learning from each other. Is that, yeah.
How does the interest work on the loans? I mean, does each business person set their own?
The lender and the borrower set the slow money loan, and I tell people that if it's a slow money loan, North Carolina, according to me, I'll put them on the website, I'll get them as much business as I can, I'll help them in every way I can, and that to me is a loan that's 2, 3, 4, maybe 5%. If it's much above that, they can go ahead with the loan, but I'm not going to call it a slow money loan. I'm really promoting the idea of low interest, because honestly, to the lender, it's peanuts. It's not that much of a difference. But to the borrower, you may not be the only person they're borrowing from. So they're getting 5 from you, but they're getting 10 over here, and they've got a mortgage over here, and so that $25 a month or 20 or 15 a month difference will add up for them. Whereas really to the lender, when you run the math on 2% versus 3% for $5,000 over 3 years, it's not a lot of money.
So the term is typically several years?
It depends on the size of the loan. Most of these loans are fairly small. So the majority of the loans that I have been facilitating and assisting with are, I did the average the other day, and the average was 3,895. We did one very large one for $400,000. That was a LLC. That was a different kind of a project. But if you take that out of my $700,000 total, you take the $300,000 and you divide it by the other 38 projects, something like that. So there have been some for 15, and there have been some for 2. So just depends.
What do you think success would look like for Slow Money? What should be the end game? Are we already there that there's $22 million that have been moved, or should we set like an overarching goal of if we hit $1 billion, that's a success?
Yeah.
Or if we put Monsanto out of business, that's a success.
Right. Right.
Like how high should we aim?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's actually something we're going to take up. That very question I want to take up in the retreat with the other 30 or so people from around the country. What are we going for here? And it's interesting because every time someone brings up that topic, they do what you just did. They do it in dollars. I mean, I like the last one. Let's put Monsanto out of business. About it. We don't really want to do that necessarily. We just want them to change their ways. Anyway, so maybe we could look at it not in monetary. We could say, if you wanted to get your hands on a book, at a certain point in history, you couldn't find one if you needed one. Now they're everywhere. Or, if you wanted to buy, local food, you could only find that in a very few places. Now you can kind of find it more places. Well, what if it felt like you could find it everywhere? That, to me, would be success. And it would be a lot of seasonal eating. We would go back to eating seasonally. I just don't eat tomatoes unless they're in season. I mean, I just wait, And I'm now put in a whole bunch of persimmons because persimmons grow in my area, and I really don't enjoy getting citrus anymore out of Florida and California. I try to do a 100-mile diet. I don't succeed. But in the attempt of that in the winter, I blow through my frozen tomatoes that I've frozen, my blueberries that I've frozen. At a certain point, I haven't got enough. So I think we could also, for some of us, what I would love to be? I would love to be Carol Blueberry Bush instead of Johnny Appleseed. I would love to take little blueberry bushes and go in every suburb all over the United States and just put them in. They take no attention. They grow just about anywhere under any conditions. The deer don't eat them. I mean, they're just, well, they might, but they're pretty invincible. And all of a sudden, a few years from now, people would look outside and say, wow, what are these things? I've got these blueberries in my yard. We could all be growing them. So we just, when we get to that point where we've so changed the mentality of people that putting in edibles makes a lot more sense than geraniums. Oh, let's put in a couple of geraniums, and let's put in some coriander and some whatever. So much food we could grow, and we just didn't have to. We didn't need to. Well, we need to now. I've also put in almond trees. I put in 14. I happen to have a little bit of acreage, not a lot, but I put in 14 apple trees. I'm not going to eat those apples, probably, but somebody might. I hope. So, I would think that would feel to me like success. We would just be part of a much bigger movement, and we would have just played a little role. We'd have collaborated. I have another chapter called Staying Connected to Our Friends. And I talk about the music festival that I helped put on, and I talk about some of the other groups in my area. And you read that and think that's true. In fact, there's a wonderful piece in there about neighbors. It turns out that when there's a calamity like Katrina, or a fire, or a hurricane or whatever, people who know their neighbors survive much better. So that when 911 comes in, people know who's in their community. So interesting. Well, you've been a wonderful, wonderful audience, and I've enjoyed your questions immensely. And I encourage you, if you have, anyone that you think they might just be interested in this movement, if we made it really easy. I've tried to make it really easy. So, thank you so much for coming out.